It's now my great pleasure to introduce our final keynote speaker today. I think many of you know her well, my colleague Lesley Yates, Director of Government Relations and Advocacy here at the AAAA. As I said earlier, this is a pretty significant day for us here at the AAAA, and I think for the whole industry this morning. And that announcement and that wonderful news is due in no small part to the tenacious and skillful work that Lesley has done over a decade, both initially as a consultant, but then working with us on staff here. I say this often and I'll say it again, I'm glad she's on our side and not on the opposition side, because she really is such a talent. And she's so passionate about our industry and about your businesses, and we're very lucky to have her. So, as we said earlier, part of what we've done over the course of the last 12 months, but probably I'd say over the last decade, is really reach out to our colleagues around the world. This issue around access to repair information is not an Australian specific issue. It's a global issue. The automotive industry is a global industry, and so we've benefited so much from connecting with our colleagues in North America and Europe, and more recently in South Africa and Brazil and other places. So Lesley's going to lead a session now on the global right to repair movement. We, as I said, are a representative on that committee. And we collaborate and share information and tactical strategies to help counter the efforts of the global car industry to prevent consumers, denying access to repair and service information. So Lesley will talk today about where Australia is compared to the rest of the world, and what's happening and what that means for us. So please join me in welcoming Lesley Yates. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart, for those lovely remarks. How generous of you, and welcome everyone. I'm just so chuffed that you all joined us today, and I am absolutely humbled that just looking at our numbers throughout the session, we've actually kept pretty much all of you on board. So that's also pretty exciting. We're going to have a chat this morning about where we sit internationally. Now, I think that's really interesting, because not only have we learned a lot from what's gone on with our international colleagues, but we can see what's coming down the line. And I think, given what just happened this morning, I think a window into what's about to happen in our future is very beneficial, and what great timing. How wonderful that you were all here this morning for what just happened. As Stuart said, it is a moment in time, and I am going to be very proud to say I was here for it. I know you will be too. So let's have a look. We're going to go around the world pretty quickly in about 30 minutes. I want to leave a lot of room for questions, because I'm sure you've got questions about what happened this morning. You may have questions about the Mitsubishi extended warranty. So let me zip around the world in 30 minutes or less so that we can get some questions asked. I'm going to oversimplify some areas, I must admit, and that is because I want to leave some time, and I know that for some of you who have international links, you'll know that I'm going to fly past some of the complexities in order to get to some of the really interesting stuff. So without further ado, let's get started. So this is where we are today. Actually, we're further along today. This was the statement that we got from the government on Wednesday. So what's interesting is I could revise that based on what Minister Sukkar said this morning, but I wanted to put that up because we owe a great debt to our international colleagues for where we are in this moment in time. And as Stuart said, we have representation at the global automotive right to repair community. The coalition is comprised of some 35 countries, but the countries that we maintain regular communication with include Canada, our good friends at the Auto Care Association in America, For GIFA, there are European counterparts. And as Stuart said, more recently, we've been engaging in dialogue with the South Africans. So ourselves and the bodies here on this slide are the conveners of Global Right to Repair. We support each other, we share resources and strategy, and we're there to provide friendship and sharing of strategy and advice. Now, what this relationship with the internationals has given us, which is so spectacular, is it's given us one of our leading arguments throughout this whole mandatory data sharing discussion with government. And I know that many of you on this forum have met with members of parliament, and I know that you have leveraged this statement as much as we have. If it can happen there, it can happen here. And it was interesting to hear the minister say this morning exactly the same. In fact, what was really interesting was to hear that he's now using this argument when he's talking to the government lawyers about whether or not this law can happen. Of course it can. It happens overseas, and every MP into every workshop was engaged in a conversation about this is not unique. This is not defying gravity. There are laws in Europe and America that work. And more than that, the very same car brands that are objecting to sharing technical service and repair information in Australia are already sharing that information in America. So it's probably been, of all the arguments that we run, one of our most effective. The second value that it provides to us is, what a gift, we're able to predict the future. So we have always known what arguments would be run against mandatory data sharing. Before we walked into an MP's office, before we engaged in discussions with the ACCC or any government department, we already knew what the car industry had either said to them before us or would say to them after we walked out the door. In fact, we were so confident about the arguments that would be run that if a member of parliament didn't raise these, Stuart and I would raise them. So we would say, after we leave your office, you're going to have a knock on the door from the car industry, and they're going to say to you, this can't happen for the following reasons. And whilst we're here in your office, why don't we tell you what our answers are? So we predicted what would be raised. We were ready for them. I have to say we were 100% right. And we made sure that if the car industry went to talk to a member of parliament, they were already armed with the answers. So we didn't have to go back again and answer the questions. We already got them ready. We said, you're probably worried about intellectual property. Don't be. No one is reverse engineering a Maserati because they've got service and repair information. You're probably concerned about security. There are safeguards that can be put around that. You may be concerned that the dealers need to invest significantly in tools and equipment and training. We understand that. We respect the dealers and their need to get a return on that investment. We, however, also invest in tools and equipment. We are skilled. So we were ready with all of the arguments. I have to say we were spot on. The only one that surprised us right at the end was vehicle theft. We didn't expect to get an argument about vehicle theft because I never, ever could imagine that anyone would argue that the independent repair sector would steal their clients' cars. So having said that, it didn't last very long and the data didn't stack up. And finally, the value that we have in talking with our internationals, of course, is we get an insight into what works and where the gaps are. And that's what I'm going to focus on a little about today. The interesting thing when you go around the 35 countries that participate in the Global Right to Repair movement is that if you're on the path, if you have made some progress, you're in one of three stages. And the first stage is always proving that there's a problem. Now, as late as last week, I saw the car industry making commentary that there was no problem in getting access to data, that independent mechanics had all the data they needed. So never underestimate, and this is what I would say to a country that was about to embark on this, never ever underestimate the degree to which you need to prove that things are broken. And I think we took a huge step when we got the government inquiries that we did. We had 2 of them. And we took a huge step when we started to move from anecdotal advice into quantitative. So the day that we started to measure the economic value and the number of vehicles that we had to send that 2% of the final repair off to a dealership and how much that cost us. The hours, the 7-hour average it took to repair a vehicle that had a data issue or to diagnose what was wrong, the hours lost when there was a technical service bulletin that we weren't aware of. So proving market failure, it's huge. It takes a long time. It certainly took us several years until the government finally agreed that, yes, there is a market failure. The second stage of the path towards a mandatory solution is, of course, a voluntary agreement. I think, we were quite fortunate in the end. I think we were in the voluntary agreement phase for only 2 years. Now, when I compare that to something like Canada, and I'll show you that in a moment, that's quite remarkable. And that is because we knew the voluntary agreement wouldn't work. We did not sabotage the voluntary agreement. We participated in absolute good faith. But from day one, we started to collect data from you about what wasn't working. So we were already collecting the evidence while we were trying to make it work. We went to meetings, asked what the sanctions were, asked the car industry whether they were monitoring and measuring, provided systematic data on what was broken, none of which was answered. So that at the end of the day, and I think Stuart said this earlier, we knew we had to go through a voluntary agreement process. And again, I would say to the people entering this fight for the first time, get ready for that. South Africa and Canada are still well and truly in it. I am very, very proud to say that this morning we moved to the third box. So we are no longer in the voluntary agreement blue box, because you heard the minister this morning say it was a failure. And it wasn't working, and that's why the government is moving to a mandatory law. And as all of you on the call know, there is a mandatory regulated regime in Europe and in America. And let's have a look at those. So I want to talk a bit about the USA this morning, because so much is happening there and it's quite exciting. I often hear people talk about whether the USA has a law or whether it has a voluntary agreement. The reality is it has both. But everything is underpinned by the law. So the Commonwealth of Massachusetts voted in 2012 by an overwhelming consumer majority for the right to repair law. And what happened after that law was passed is that the independent repair lobby went straight, of course, to Congress to get that ratified nationally. So what would have happened is that it would have been entered into the House of Representatives for a national law. And what happened before that could occur is that all of the auto associations got together and said, how about we have an MOU? An MOU is an easier instrument because it can be amended and verified, it can be adapted to changing circumstances, and so that's what happened. The MOU is not what drives the American system. It is the Massachusetts law, because if there is a breach of the MOU, it has to go back to Massachusetts. So the US has a law, and the reason that data is shared in America is because of Massachusetts. The other reason that data is shared is because of the NASTF, the National Automotive Service Task Force. And we heard the minister this morning talking about the industry body, and we are grateful for his commitment this morning for the seed funding, because this is really what helps the system to work. So it's NASTF that supplies the secure data release model. And I know you're all worrying about how we get access to secure data. That happens through the NASTF system. But what happens here is this is a very cooperative model where the OEMs are facilitating access to information and really assisting independent repairers through any difficulties. And also there is a level of training provided. It's pretty heartening when you go onto the NASTF website to see updated technical bulletins. It's for many of us who have gone in, and I'm sure it's more impressive for you in workshops. When you go into the NASTF task force website, you just think, oh my God, what could be? And now you can go into it and say, wow, this is our future. This is what it looks like. What happens for NASTF is that mechanics are talking to NASTF about data that they can't find. And that's either because they're just having trouble locating it, they can't find it because it's been put in the wrong place, or alternatively, the car manufacturer hasn't made it available, and NASTF is the one who helps resolve that and identify disputes. And look, they're running at a 90%. Many of the issues, once you have a law, can be resolved cooperatively if you have an industry body that is capable of doing that. So that's really incredibly exciting. I'll just keep talking while I refine my screen. Okay, what is interesting and exciting? What is really interesting and exciting about the Massachusetts law What is interesting and exciting about Massachusetts is that they are about to embark upon the second phase of reform. And when I say about to, I'm actually talking about the 3rd of November. I'm actually talking about a vote that's about to occur on the 3rd of November. So many of you will be excited that we're actually talking about the election of a new president on the 3rd of November. Well, for us, we'll be watching the vote yes on question 1, which will be put at the same time as Americans go to the vote in Massachusetts to elect the president. So this is the line that we have from the Vote Yes lobby that we're in constant communication with, and this is the information that they've put out to the Massachusetts people. So 86% voted for right to repair in 2012, but as you are aware on this forum, as you are more than aware, telematics is the issue that adds a level of complexity into right to repair, because a lot of the legislation in 2012 was drafted upon the assumption that we have an OBD port and that we are plugging in a scan tool. Now, whilst a lot of the legislation doesn't necessarily restrict the data to wireless data, to telematics, it doesn't cut it out, it doesn't specifically mention it. So for some in the industry, there is a great fear that telematics will cut out independent repairers. And just to explain this a little more eloquently, I'm going to get my friend Callum to do that, because this is just a good 90-second update on what this means.
Question 1 on the Massachusetts ballot this fall may look familiar. It's a sequel to the right to repair measure that passed 8 years ago. Because of that law, you can take your car to any shop, not just a dealer service center, and a mechanic can plug into the vehicle's computer system to figure out what's wrong. You can also buy a device to do this yourself. The idea is that you have a right to the information needed to repair your car wherever you want, and can't be forced to a dealership, hence the right to repair moniker. Now, many mechanics say they ought to have access to something more, something called telematics. If you drive a newish car, it's probably equipped with the automobile equivalent of a Fitbit that monitors the vehicle's mechanical health and sends those readings wirelessly back to the manufacturer. The term telematics refers to this kind of real-time data about your car, and it can be valuable info. There may be nothing wrong with your vehicle yet, but if telematics tell the manufacturer that a certain part is wearing down and will need to be fixed soon, the automaker can notify you in an email, or maybe even right on your dashboard. And there's a decent chance that alert will come with an offer to schedule maintenance with a few easy finger taps at the dealer that sold you the car in the first place. Some independent shops worry they'll lose business to dealer service centers because of the convenience factor. A yes vote on question 1 would create a shared database for the telematics that currently flow only to automakers. Drivers could then grant permission for any mechanic to keep tabs on their cars, which could help level the playing field. Your neighborhood shop could more easily anticipate a problem and prompt you to schedule service before something breaks, just like a dealership. Automakers strongly oppose question 1 and say they're not just looking out for dealerships, but for drivers too. They say a large telematics database could be a magnet for hackers, and they point out that even if a maintenance alert tries to steer you to a dealer service center, you could always choose a different mechanic instead. A no vote on question 1 would make no change to the current right to repair law. For 90.9 WBUR, I'm Callum Borchers.
Thank you, Callum. So that was Callum's review of what's happening in the US election. What I want to show you next is I want to show you what is going on in the opposition. I think that's incredibly interesting to see what it is that the car companies are saying in response to the independent repair lobby.
I think you've got to activate.
just do the full presentation and move to the next slide.
Yes, go down. Presentation down the bottom.
It's green. And then go to your next slides. Beautiful.
Question 1 on the Massachusetts ballot this fall may look familiar. It's a sequel to the right to repair measure that passed 8 years ago. Because of that law, you can take your car to any shop, not just a dealer service.
Click to the next screen.
Ha-ha.
If question 1 passes in Massachusetts, anyone could access the most personal data stored in your vehicle. The Federal Trade Commission warns your address could be paired with your garage codes to give easy access to your home. Domestic violence advocates say a sexual predator could use the data to stalk their victims. Vote no on 1. Keep your data safe. If question 1 passes.
So I think you can see that the pushback is incredible. That's a good example of what the car industry is saying in response to the Right to Repair Coalition's request for telematics to be included in the Right to Repair vote. I just wanted to show you the level of financing that is in play for this ballot. Some 24.3 million has been raised by the Right to Repair Coalition, and I've given you an understanding of some of the key players in the Right to Repair side. On the side of the Coalition for Safe and Secure Data, so the no vote, has raised $26.5 million. Let's never misunderstand that. Let's never underestimate the degree to which the car industry is going to be engaging in a pushback for our industry. Can she still see? I want to just do a around the world nice and quickly. As I said, because I want to leave a lot of questions. I want to leave a lot of time for questions. Let's have a look quickly at Canada and South Africa, predominantly because they have a voluntary agreement. So Canada achieved a voluntary agreement in 2009. I think many people have said this morning, this has been, our efforts have been a decade in the making. That's certainly the case for every other country that has achieved some level of milestones for data sharing. So CASIS is the Canadian scheme. The Canadians are currently trying to move that from a voluntary agreement to a legislative one, and they're going to be using telematics for that. So their view is that,
sorry, we can see we can see everything.
but can you see my slide? I'm just fixing up my slides while I talk. South Africa has just achieved some competition guidelines for sharing of automotive service and repair information. This has been a really interesting activity for the South Africans. They were pushing for a law or for a mandatory industry code. As we expected, they've ended up with some draft competition guidelines. And they will need to go through this process of guidelines or voluntary before they move into something mandatory. But what's really interesting about the South Africans is that the competition guidelines go much further than any other jurisdiction around the globe for warranty rights and unbundling car sales and extended warranties. So they've actually achieved a great deal more than America and Europe and ourselves in having it established in competition guidelines that when you buy a new vehicle, you buy the vehicle and then you're offered different options for car servicing and warranties. And these can't all be bundled together. So you can't use extended warranty rights in order to sell the vehicle. It's a really interesting achievement by the South Africans, and something that we're going to be speaking with them some more over the next 12 months, particularly given the fight that we are currently in regarding Mitsubishi's 10-year extended warranty. So while they're a little disappointed that they've got draft guidelines, they're expecting these to be approved towards the end of this year, held up by COVID. Isn't everything, but they have made some significant improvements, and I think that's quite impressive, and I think that's going to be landmark for the worldwide global repair movement. Let's have a look at the EU. Now, I'm not going to cover Europe in any huge depth because it is a complicated scheme. It's not one that we necessarily wanted to leverage. We have to give all due respect to the Europeans because they've had things in place since 2002. So they really were the founders of right to repair. Now, they have what is effectively a trade instrument. I don't want to get too detailed about that, but what that means is that you can't sell vehicles into the European market without supplying the service and repair information. So just as we have those trade requirements for the availability of spare parts, they've put in their legislation that can't sell a car unless you can guarantee that it has spare parts and diagnostic service and repair information. Now, it is complicated because whilst the principles are easy to see, nice and clear, it does get a little bit more complicated because those block exemptions have to be renewed, and the next renewal is 2023. So as we know, once you've got to renegotiate it, I mean, I'd certainly hate to renegotiate everything that we've achieved on a 5 to 10 year basis. It would just mean a rolling cycle of supporting and defending and fighting. But this renewal will give the Europeans a chance to put telematics into the next block exemption, and they're currently involved in a very, very drawn out European debate about cybersecurity. So the car manufacturers are talking about cybersecurity threats that come from what they think is a sharing of telematic information, and the Europeans are engaged in working with lots of universities and experts about how telematics is not a cybersecurity risk.
Let's go to display and switch display.
I'm just cleaning up the display, guys. I'm aware that you can see both. Shall I stop share?
Stop share and reshare, maybe.
I'm just going to talk while I reshare so you can just see my face for a little while. So the Europeans are always in a fairly long, drawn out, protracted conversation. We felt that the American system was simpler and easier to copy, which is why we did that. Which is why we copied the Americans. Great. So what we do know from all of our relationships with all of our international partners is that you need 3 bits to make a system work. You need a mandatory law, you need a legal framework, otherwise nobody comes to the table because they simply don't have to. You do need an industry body. That's the kind of good cop, bad cop bit about it. You need an industry body that is capable of cooperating so that everyone in the industry can be informed and aware so that we can work our way through any disputes. Half of the disputes are about sheer, mess and complexity. Some of the disputes are about bloody-mindedness, but we need to work our way through a process where we're working with failure of the system to work versus failure to comply with the law. So the industry body is absolutely critical, and of course you need an enforcement and legal sanctions. So it doesn't work unless there is a body that is there to say that you have missed every opportunity to obey the law, and we'll now be in a position to take legal action against you. The industry body should actually be able to triage disputes so that by the time they get to the lawyers, it's pretty clear that there has actually been a breach. And these 3 bits are critical, and all 3 of them have to work. I had a bit of a look at some of the questions that were coming through while Michael Sukkar was speaking, and many of them were exactly that. What's the enforcement? What's the legal sanction? What great questions. So that brings us to today and our mandatory law. And again, I had a look at some of the questions and I can see how many people are really keen to see what's in it. I have to say, so are we. We do know the principles it will be based on, because these are the principles that came out of the AAAC report, and you'll all remember that it has to be fair and reasonable cost. There has to be safety, and security is not a reason to withhold data. It's just that safety and security may require some filters in order to receive it. The car industry can't just decide unilaterally to hold that back. And the legislation should say that. So these are the sorts of principles that we're looking for. Again, these are the principles that the Massachusetts law is based upon. I think, as you heard this morning, and this body is now $250,000 richer as of this morning, we are working on the industry body. We do expect there to be a transition period, and I could hear that this morning in the minister's commentary. And it will be this industry body's responsibility to make sure we can get things up and running, that every player knows what their obligations are, and that we're all part of the solution and not part of the problem. We are well down the track for the industry body. Now, in addition to the whole let's all play along nicely, this body is going to be responsible for designing the secure data release model, and it will also do what is probably one of the most critical elements of making it all work, and that is the definitions. What's security? What's safety? What's in? What's not in? These will all be the responsibility initially for the industry body, and supplying dispute resolution is going to be critical too, because the technical panel will assist in advising the dispute body, and that's where we start to establish precedents about the data should have been there, why wasn't it, and what were the consequences of it not being there for the consumer and for the independent repairer. So the fact that the industry body is on its way is also incredibly exciting, and the 5 signatory parties have already begun to meet. Very exciting. So what does this mean for us, all of those international experiences? Well, I mean, my advice is keep an eye out for the Massachusetts right to repair vote to answers on ballot question number 1, which happens on November the 3rd, next week. So we'll be watching that very carefully, but more importantly, we're going to be looking at the exposure draft that we now know is weeks away for the sorts of things that we have learnt from our international partners. And it's quite likely that Stuart and I will be consulting with our international partners, because they know where there are gaps. They know where the gaps may be, they know what to look for, and they know how to make a piece of legislation robust and able to stand up to the challenges that we know we're about to have. So we'll keep an eye on the definitions. We know we need dispute resolution. We're obviously going to be keeping a look at the consequences for not obeying the law. We have raised telematics the whole time we've been discussing mandatory data sharing. And clearly, we want a law that is robust and future-proof. We do not want to be back here again in 6 years' time talking about the vehicles of the future. We want our legislation to be principles-based. And the principle is that independent repairers have access to the required technical and diagnostic information that allows us to service our customers' vehicles, whether or not that data comes via the OBD port or whether the vehicle is wirelessly transmitting diagnostic data back to the car manufacturer. We want access to that data, and that data should belong to the consumer, and the consumer should decide who is their repairer of choice. So we're certainly going to be watching out for telematics and the degree to which this legislation serves us today and into the future. Now, it's always hard to predict the future, but we have a leg up because we know what's going on in Europe, we know what's going on in America, we know what the pushback looks like, and we know how to be well prepared for it, all of which we've gained because of our very strong international links. And once again, I think it's appropriate that I pay respect this morning to our friends in the Auto Care Association, in the Automotive Industry Association in Canada, and MIWA in South Africa in particular, and our support for FIGIFA in Europe. All of our friends that have offered us great support and great intellectual rigour to make sure that we were able to achieve what we achieved this morning. So I'm very happy to take some questions, Stuart.
Thank you, Lesley. And just on behalf of myself, our team at the AAAA, but I think everyone in our industry, I'd just like to sincerely thank you for all the work that you do on behalf of our industry. It's an amazing amount of work. I mean, I think those of you that do know a little bit about the way government works. Governments don't just change the law willy-nilly. This is historic. In fact, not only is it historic in Australia, because this is the first legislation of its type to have to basically intervene into a market, but also to have that industry body sitting underneath it. So it's never been done before in Australia, but also in the rest of the world. And whilst we, as Lesley said, we are so thankful for the support and guidance that our colleagues internationally have provided us, they very much see us as breaking new ground here in Australia. And wherever in the world you get someone leading the pack, then everyone else can use that as precedent to move things forward. So fantastic presentation, Lesley, but also thank you so much for everything you do.